It's finally happening. Dragon's Dogma is back. After teasing this thing for so long, a lot of people were starting to wonder if it was ever really going to happen. We're finally getting a proper sequel to one of the strangest, most innovative action RPGs of all time. The original game was kind of an anomaly when it came out in 2012, especially here in the West. The first Dark Souls had only just come out, and the Monster Hunter series was still this niche thing that only hardcore players really had any interest in. For most people, Dragon's Dogma's main point of comparison was Skyrim, which it's nothing like at all. Most people didn't know what to make of the game, and at least some of that blame falls squarely on Capcom themselves. They wanted Dragon's Dogma to be their Skyrim, after all. Japan is just weird like that. When Sony wanted their own Skyrim, From Software made Demon's Souls. When Capcom wanted it, they made Dragon's Dogma. The original is janky, it's weird, it's got a ton of inexplicable and confusing mechanics, but it's also extremely fun. It's got one of the best character creators of all time, and the combat is some of the most varied and interesting in any action RPG. The first game never quite managed to reach Capcom's high expectations for it. Sales weren't terrible, but as of 2023, the series has sold about 8 million copies, which isn't bad. Clearly, they were expecting more, though. Otherwise, we probably would have had a sequel earlier. Keep in mind, we've gone from Dark Souls 2 all the way to Elden Ring in the time it's taken to get one proper sequel here. So I really see Dragon's Dogma 2 as kind of a redo or reboot for the series, giving it another shot in the gaming market that's probably a lot more receptive to what the series is doing. And I think the potential here is huge. Monster Hunter games are bigger than ever. Capcom has been on a roll these past few years, putting out all these Game of the Year contenders left or right. Elden Ring blew up the charts, left people hankering for a new open-world action RPG. All the stars are aligned to make Dragon's Dogma 2 a success, which feels crazy to me. As a fan of the original, I never really thought we'd see the day where a game like this could be a mainstream thing. As much as I love the first game, it's not perfect. It can be odd and confusing. The story kind of bare bones and awkwardly presented. The pawn system is very strange, but all those things were considered weaknesses, and they can be strengths in the sequel. There's an opportunity to take what worked about the game and refine the elements that didn't work as well. And from everything I've seen in the pre-release footage, it kind of looks like that's exactly what they did. Until I actually get my hands on the game, I obviously can't say for sure, but everything I've seen so far looks really promising. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty here. Let's talk about what Dragon's Dogma even is and dive into everything I've seen in the trailers, take an in-depth look at what seems like it's going to stay the same, what's changing, and what improvements they may have been making to the formula. Keep in mind, I don't have any special insights here. I'm just somebody who really enjoyed the first game, and I've been combing through the pre-release information about as best as I can, and obviously the final release, it could end up different. The one thing I will say really has me hopeful here is that Hideaki Itsuno is returning as director. He was in charge of the first game and is the main guy behind the good Devil May Cry games. He was the replacement director on Devil May Cry 2, but you can't really hold that against him. He's also responsible for the follow-up, Devil May Cry 3, which is like the high watermark for the series and one of the best action games ever. The guy still does stellar work, too. Look at Devil May Cry 5. That's him, too. I mean, it's a lot of other people, but he was at the helm. Dragon's Dogma is not Devil May Cry, though. It's an action RPG set in an open world where you pick a class, complete quests, and collect loot. On paper, it sounds like any other fantasy RPG, but when you're playing it, it's much closer to something like Monster Hunter, but open world. That's because your main goal is hunting monsters. But instead of dinosaurs and bears, you're fighting mythological creatures, and depending on your class, you get a bunch of different options for taking these beasts down. You can focus on heavy damage as a fighter, focus on spell casting as a mage, or use arrows and knives as a strider. Every vocation and advanced vocation gets their own unique abilities you can use, similar to cooldown moves in something like God of War. Magic users are especially interesting because unlike how passive they are in other RPGs, or at least tend to be, playing as a mage can be really intense as a fighter, and they eventually get access to some truly ridiculous spells. My personal favorite is probably the Strider, though. These guys focus on precise damage, and you can use bows to attack them from a distance or knives to jump on a giant monster's back and stab their weak points. Any class can climb on enemies, but the Strider benefits the most from doing so. And also, just mentioning that, any enemy can be grappled onto and gives the giant monster encounters a kind of Shadow of the Colossus feel. And then there's also the pawn system. This is where the game gets a bit weird. See, when you start a game, you design your character, and then you get get to create a pawn, basically a custom party member in any other RPG, but with a really odd story function. As an Arisen, you have the power to command pawns, these weird robot-like beings that look like people but do whatever you say. You get the one you've created, and you can recruit 2 more from the Rift, the game's internet portal, which lets you use other people's pawns from around the world. Now, there's no multiplayer. You can't play with other players like in Monster Hunter. All you can do is recruit other players' pawns. And what makes pawns different from your standard AI-controlled party members is they start off at square one. They're pretty stupid and useless in battle at first, but they start to learn new tactics and ways to fight enemies as the game goes on. There's this AI learning system where they get smarter as they encounter different things in the world. They eventually require less hand-holding to get them through fights. It's a bizarrely in-depth system that has a lot of working parts, but basically doesn't actually affect what you're doing all that much. It's just one of those weird background systems that you hear about in RPGs sometimes, I guess. It's complex, it's strange, and it's also one of the most unique things about the game. There's also just a ton I could get into about how combat works in general. The various systems that govern how the story plays out, the awesome Dark Souls-inspired expansion, Dark Arisen, but I'll get into that stuff as we're talking about what's actually in the sequel. For Dragon's Dogma 2, there are some changes to the vocations. Now, instead of 3, there's 4. Warrior and Mage are the same, but Strider's been split up between Archer and Thief. Along with those basic classes, they've shown off a little more advanced vocations like Magic Archer, Magic Spearman, Sorcerer, and the most intriguing one yet, the Trickster. These games have always had some pretty unusual classes, but Trickster sounds especially nuts. These guys use a magic sensor to create various illusions to trick enemies. From the pre-release trailers, I've seen them make decoys to draw away attention, make fake walls appear, and use smoke to trick enemies into attacking each other. For an action game, that's an unusual class. I have no idea how effective they actually will be for dummies like me, but they look like a lot of fun to mess around with either way. But the thing that I will also say impresses me about this sequel is how similar it looks to the original. Capcom could have easily turned this game into Fantasy Monster Hunter and called it a day, but it seems like they're intentionally trying to preserve the mechanics of the original game. The controls look nearly identical, with some slight alterations here and there. There's no dedicated lock-on button. Certain abilities cause your character to lock onto enemies, but most regular attacks don't, which is where a lot of Monster Hunter comparisons come from. They don't have lock-on targeting or anything like that, if you're curious. You can still jump, grab enemies, use special class abilities, attack with heavy and light attacks. That's all the same, but there are now new vocation actions that are mapped to the R1 button on the controller, which let you do different things. Like the warrior can block, the thief can do a special dodge move, along with some classic returning monsters that look almost identical to how they looked in the original game, like the Cyclops and the Ogre. The trailers revealed a laundry list of new monsters to fight. There's a Minotaur, a Medusa, some slimes which are apparently impervious to physical damage, a Dullahan, a ghostly headless knight who reminds me of Death from the Dark Arisen add-on. One of the most spectacular new enemies shown so far is this thing they call the Talos, a giant statue from, something like looks straight out of Shadow of the Colossus. Like, it's very clearly inspired by that. It's covered in these glowing weak points that you have to scramble around to destroy. The game's still keeping things weird though, like with the Sphinx, an enemy that challenges you to solve riddles in an open world. If you get them right, it rewards you. If you answer wrong, it attacks. Monsters look pretty reactive in this game. They can run into walls, they can hurt themselves, you can find them fighting other monsters in the old world, and they actually are affected by characters grabbing onto them. For example, if a character grapples the monster's leg, it'll have trouble moving forward, or if you grab its arm, then the added weight slows it down. Climbing appears to have been made a little more effective as well. Now you can actually stand up on a beast's back or shoulders, which gives you more options for how to attack. Grabbing smaller enemies, also easier. You don't have to stun enemies anymore to grab them, which is great for people who can't stop tossing goblins off cliffs. It's one of the simple joys of the original, so I'm happy to see that it's been made more streamlined and easier to do here. One of the more disappointing aspects of the original game has also been rectified. When you grapple onto a griffin, you no longer get thrown off when it flies up in the air. Now you can cling to it and get a bird's eye view of the open world and ride the monster back to its nest to continue the fight. That is a great development. I love that. In regards to pawns, we're mostly relying on developer interviews here, but it sounds like they've been given a lot more reactive dialogue, which that means they're going to respond to each other rather than just repeat a series of generic combat barks. The original game's pawns would repeat the same few lines over and over again, so giving them more varied things to say might be an improvement. Honestly, they just talk too much in general, so hopefully this game isn't repeating the Xenoblade problem where every battle is a cacophony of noise from your party members blathering nonstop. The pre-release footage does seem like they've toned that aspect down a bit, but I don't know for sure, obviously. Hopefully they'll give us a slider or something if it's too much. One thing I will say is it seems like they have been simplified. Instead of having multiple traits and secret traits like the original, every pawn looks like it has one inclination and one specialization that defines their characters. Inclinations are like personality types, while specializations are combat knowledge and skills. These affect how the pawns act in battle, and because the system is simplified, maybe it'll give devs more room to make the different types feel more distinct. A lot of the original game's combat looks to be retained for the sequel, but there are a few new mechanics to modernize the experience. The most noteworthy thing I noticed is how the game has new takedowns and cinematic moments where you perform a powerful execution attack against downed enemies. This works on little guys and big guys too. Like, knock a monster over and you can trigger a special attack that does a ton of damage, but unlike most games that do this kind of thing, there's no invincibility frames for it in Dragon's Dogma 2. So if you're not careful, you can get knocked out of the animation mid-swing. There's a white health mechanic in play in the sequel, sort of like scratch damage that you can take over time that can't be recovered through normal means. In the original game, was implemented as a way to keep players from exploring the open world too much. Eventually, they'd need to return to the main city to restore their health. In Dragon's Dogma 2, the lost health can be restored by resting at a camp. These heavy items need to be carried around, and they're consumed when you use them, but they allow you to restore yourself to max HP without having to go back to base. Dying also looks pretty significantly different. Now, instead of getting knocked out instantly if your health reaches 0, the game puts your character in a staggered state where they can use health items to get back up or have a pawn revive them before they're knocked out for good. As somebody who tends to play classes with less HP, this change is a lifesaver, and it's probably going to save me from a lot of deaths that would be instantaneous normally. There's a lot of other unusual systems at play here too. Like, for example, there are elves which speak their own language. As shown in the gameplay showcase, your character doesn't know Elvish, so if you want to speak with elves, you need a pawn who can speak Elvish. There's also an entirely new race in the game, these animal hybrids called Beastren, who were actually originally meant to be in the first game, but half of that game's content got cut in development. Now they're in the sequel and they play a prominent role in the story. Seems like the focus is on two kingdoms, each with their own ideas of how to deal with the dragon problem. The story kind of seems like a reboot of the original game. Starting point's the same. You're an Arisen who had your heart taken by the dragon, so now you have to hunt the beast down to regain your humanity. That's completely the same, but in the sequel you start off in a dungeon. People call you a false Arisen. They're distrustful of you rather than your character being instantly hailed as a chosen one, like in the first game. The Beastren apparently play a major part in the story, but what's particularly interesting about them is that you can actually play as one, and that affects how NPCs react to you. I'm guessing the story's mostly the same, but it's an interesting gesture. I mean, I'm curious to see how much the story changes depending on what race you play as. To make a long story short, it looks like a huge game with a ton going on for it. There appears to be some streamlining for some of the more obscure systems from the original, but overall it looks like it's holding on to the stuff that made the original great. The pawn system is back, the character creation looks as robust as before, and I haven't even talked about the clothing layer system from the original. That's still the best armor system I've ever seen. The amount of variety that you can have for each character in terms of what they're wearing is unbelievable, and it looks like the sequel is keeping all of it. If there's one potentially disappointing aspect about the game, it's that just like the original, there is no multiplayer. You can't play this co-op like a Souls game. There's no Monster Hunter style team play. It's just you and pawns. On some level, I don't hate that. I love single player games. It's a big thing for me. But this is also the type of game where I think it kind of still feels like a single player game when you're playing with more people, but you're playing with more people and it's social and fun at the same time. It's not that big of a disappointment though, because I mean, it's Dragon's Dogma 2. I don't think that I'm going to be not playing it because I can't play a co-op. I'll also say I'm not going to be not playing it due to system requirements. They're actually pretty reasonable. On PC at least, the recommended specs are just an RTX 2080 or RX 6700. For such a visually impressive game, it must be pretty well optimized. It also has DLSS support right from the gate, which is very appreciated. The Resident Evil 4 Remake PC version actually wasn't that bad as far as PC ports go, so I've got pretty high hopes for this one. There have been a ton of shoddy PC ports lately, but Capcom seems to be doing better about it, so I'm fairly hopeful for it. It's been a long wait, but Dragon's Dogma 2 is finally coming out March 22nd. The original was underappreciated at the time that it came out, but I think the sequel is really primed to be a huge hit. I think the mystique around the original got a lot of people interested. A lot of people are holding out for a sequel because they've been talking about a sequel, and that makes sense. The first game's more than 10 years old at this point. It's hardly a perfect game, but it's great. And the expectation I have is that the sequel is probably going to be even better, fixing a lot of the things that weren't perfect about the original. To put it mildly, the hype is real for this one. So Capcom, don't screw it up. No pressure or anything. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero. And we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.